Hi everybody, it's Dr. Ovali. I'm here for another installment of my COVID-19 mini-series. And definitely due for a new episode with all the changes that are occurring. Our case rates are increasing dramatically. Vaccine is coming out. A lot of things to update all of you on. I'm going to keep this to definitely less than an hour, but you may want to plan on a little, 20-minute black coffee kind of intermission to maybe keep you awake through this thing. Hopefully it won't be too boring, but I will try to move along and keep it, focused and succinct, but there's a lot to go over. So without further ado, let's get started. So let me get my pointer here. So what we're going to be covering, where are we now, where will we be headed in terms of the numbers, what is the update as far as medications goes, the different, we're going to then talk about the different vaccines and how they work, and get into safety and my recommendations. So where are we now? Well, we're right here. This arrow should be pointing kind of right here. This was 2 days ago, but in California, you can see very steep incline in cases. Death rate is following. Usually it lags a little bit, but you can see pretty sharp increase as well. 22,000 deaths in California and on the rise. This is U.S. data. You can see here the summer hump doesn't even compare to what's going on now. Winter is coming, I guess you could say, with 18 million cases and 320,000 deaths, which is dramatically increasing. Top 5 amongst states here: California in the case count per 100,000 in the last 7 days. This is, not a moniker of pride. You don't want to win this contest, but we're really, likely to rise here to one of the most affected states. This throws back to my first talk where we looked at the epidemic of 1918 there. And just one of the things I had mentioned at that time, and I just mentioned here because it's fully come to fruition, is where they had done a social isolation and managed to kind of curve this thing down. Christmas came, and then that December month, as you could see, they had this huge, tremendous spike with, tens and tens of thousands of deaths as a result. And it's just, history repeating itself. In fact, if you this is our current death rate, you could sort of see this steep incline, almost, quite similar to what was going on at that time. Here we see the headlines from this weekend. In the Atlantic, California has lost control and now opening field hospitals to cope with the increased case rate. Hogue here locally has also been impacted. I know we have, as of Monday, 3 ICU beds available, but we're seeing quite a number of COVID cases. And I've seen it in my practice as well. I'm probably getting about 10 phone calls a day of people either having COVID or having, friends and family that have come down with COVID. It's, really on the move right now. Here we see that compared to last week, there's a 30% increase in hospitalizations. And this was New York's highest day of new cases, 18,800, and this is where we're at. We're probably going to surpass that and basically be, the worst hit state pretty soon, probably within the next week or so. Okay, so where are we headed? Here are the prognosticators compiled into one graph, and you can see this displays quite a bit, by mid-January, somewhere, anywhere between here. But most of them, if you look at the consensus here, it's about 400,000. So we're going from 320,000 right now to 400. That's 80,000 deaths between now and basically 3 weeks from now. I don't know how many people the Rose Bowl holds. Is it 40,000? I don't know, 40,000. But if it's, but picture if it is that filled twice. That's it's like crazy number of people are going to die within just 3 weeks because of this disease. Just a week ago, people are still sending these things online where there are videos of people advocating that this COVID thing is overblown. It's basically not even as bad as the flu. And I just threw this slide in here to show you, in 2018 and 2019, these are the death rates due to respiratory illnesses from flu. And this is 2020's death rate to respiratory illnesses. And this is, you could see a little bit of a difference here, right? It's not even close to what we usually would get with the flu. This, and the death rate, when you calculate, you're talking about the area under the curve. It's really, really quite significant as far as, number of both cases and number of deaths. That doesn't even come close to what we would see with a traditional flu. This is a much more aggressive virus that's been persistent and has really, unfortunately, is getting the upper hand on us. Okay, I get this question quite a bit, and it's that there's certainly a discrepancy between mild and severe cases, and it's kind of a mystery as to why some people barely get anything, and other people are on the ventilator before they know it. And the reason for this is obviously multifactorial, but there seems to be 5 genes that they've identified that seem to segregate with poor outcomes. And these are kind of in the study realm world. We're not clinically using these tests, but soon it may be that we do a COVID-19 genetic test, and if you happen to have, say a TYK2 a gene allele present, that may mean you're going to be, likely to have complications if you do get COVID, and that may maybe convince you to take the vaccine, for instance. So there may be some utility in identifying these genes and possibly screening people for them. Okay, you've heard a lot about the new COVID mutation coming over from England, and it started in a small town in England. Now in London, it's basically taking over, like more than the majority of COVID cases are these B117, and it's 23 spots are changed, and it's made this 2 things. Number one, 70% more contagious, and then number 2, it tends to treat younger people like it does adults. So whereas COVID-19 now tends not to even infect children, this guy doesn't seem to discriminate, which is unfortunate. They found a similar variant as well in Africa, and it has not been identified here in the U.S. It may well already be here and we don't know it. My feeling is it's probably not, because we're still not seeing this rise in children and young adults having bad outcomes. So I think if it were here, we would be seeing that. Now, okay, when we look here, as a result of all this going on, these are the states, the countries rather, that have responded to this by blocking travel from UK. The US has been kind of slow to follow. France actually needs to be added to this list. The US has been slow to follow. They need to do it. Hopefully, we need to probably do that within the next week. Cuomo has now, put in for at least New York, if people travel from the UK into New York, they're actually going to have an officer visit them and enforce a 14-day quarantine. Apparently, that was new as of today. I don't think we have this strain in the U.S. because we haven't seen an uptick in young people having complicated COVID cases. I think if it was significantly present, we would be seeing that. We need to do anything we can to avoid from this entering the U.S. Because it is highly contagious. Okay, complications of COVID. Now, these are things that we've learned since our last talk, and I want to share with you because they're really quite actually concerning. In some cases, patients can suffer these things even having had an asymptomatic case, which really makes this especially of interest. So it's called long COVID syndrome, which means symptoms are persisting a long time, after having had COVID. And it's a constellation of symptoms, and we're going to go over just a few that I find particularly pertinent. The most common one is brain fog. So patients will say, I had COVID 3 weeks ago and I'm just so out of it. It's hard for me to remember stuff. And, they can have depression or anxiety, some mood instability issues. It seems like this is a transient, as you see in this study, not a permanent effect, but it's common. Up to 50% of patients are describing this. Lung problems are also extremely common. The crazy thing is it's in 50% of asymptomatic people are having findings on subsequent CAT scan of what we call this ground glass appearance. So these are actual structural changes in the lung that's occurring after COVID. Some cases symptomatic, in some cases not. There was a football player whose name I'm not going to remember, but an NFL player on one of the teams who had COVID came out and played the subsequent week and got winded and had to stop playing because he had so much respiratory insufficiency. And I suspect that what will happen is in the cases where this occurs, people will not notice it unless they're put under some kind of stress, like high altitude, maybe on an airplane, maybe heavy endurance sports, or like playing football professionally, of course, where you notice you don't quite have the reserve you used to have. This is could be a permanent change. I'm concerned that it likely will be, just because these changes are structural. And so in one, worth mentioning, there was actually a study that came out of China where 70% of patients did have some kind of abnormality on these lung scans. So this seems to be quite common. Okay, blood clotting. So it turns out that when you get COVID in some patients, and it's quite common actually, here in this study it was half of the 172 patients, they developed an antibody. It's an autoantibody where they took that antibody and subsequently gave it to mice, and then the mice started having all sorts of problems with clotting. So it probably lends towards an increased risk of forming clots. Now, so what we're talking about here is someone can have an asymptomatic case of COVID and then 3 months later start developing problems. In this actual instance here, we talk about strokes, and we've noticed a spike in the number of strokes, but specifically in young people, which is bizarre. They have no risk factors for stroke, and they're having episodes that we've noticed. And if they get tested, we're seeing that they're positive for these antibodies. Also an increased rate of limb ischemia and leg amputations, which is associated with clots in the peripheral arterial system. This is obviously a concerning thing and something we need to be aware of in people that have had COVID, asymptomatic or not, may have increased risk of having these kinds of complications. So if I haven't gotten your attention yet, men, this may do so. Male infertility. So there was a study out of Lancet where they actually looked at semen specimens and did sperm counts. And as it turns out, the normal concentration here was 40.9. And in COVID patients, it was drastically decreased from 11 here down to 10. In more severe cases, it seemed to correlate with the severity of COVID. Subsequent histological studies showed that there's antibodies that are somehow produced and cause inflammation in the germ cells of the testicles that are responsible for producing these sperm counts. Is this a permanent thing or is this a transitory thing is not known. Will this cause infertility or impotence? And that is not known either. It will certainly make it harder for this person to successfully get their partner impregnated, but whether it makes it impossible or not, it's unlikely. I also think this is probably be more transitory, maybe, than say the lung changes that we're seeing. However, it is not known exactly if this, to what extent this persists. Okay, Hydroxychloroquine. I'm going to start talking about some of the medicines. Now, if you go back to my original video, you'd see I was an advocate. I mean, I'm sure you guys probably do that, right? Instead of Netflix, you watch my videos. But anyways, you'd see that I was a big advocate of hydroxychloroquine. And just simply because understanding the mechanism, it sort of makes sense. And in that video, I advocated for early use. And I actually said, you know, in late use, I doubt this is going to have any effect. And subsequent to that video, 6 months later, you know, within that 6 month period, it was study after study looking at hospitalized patients, ICU patients. And in other words, you know, it's way too late after the fact, basically, showing that hydroxychloroquine wasn't working. And the media ran with that, of course, and it entered a political realm. The fact is that when this is a meta-analysis done on all the studies on hydroxychloroquine, when the studies were actually looking at what we call, you know, early treatment, 100% of those studies were positive. Mixed results after that, right? But there's a lot of data that does support early use of hydroxychloroquine. I think, and I don't understand why the controversy here. I think that the, you know, the politics had kind of spoiled the science here, and it's unfortunate. I will tell you my own experience with hydroxychloroquine. I've treated, I may have had, I'll tell you, probably 50 cases of COVID. I have treated maybe somewhere between 20 to 30, I'm guessing, just offhand, cases. All but one helped. There was one patient who said it didn't do diddly for them. I'm going to tell you, every single other time I've prescribed it, it's been quite dramatic. I'll tell you a personal case. It was my son Joshua. He lives in Los Angeles, and he's 22, and he calls me. He says, "Hey, Dad, I'm feeling sick." And he calls me 2 hours later and says, "Dad, oh my God, I'm really sick. I think I'm going to the ER." He had a fever of 103. He was short of breath. I said, "Well, you know, let's try hydroxychloroquine." I actually stashed some in his backpack, and said, "Just take it. Let's give it a couple hours and just sort of see how you do." Well, he called me, was probably like 6 or 7 hours later, which was really early the next morning, and says, "Dad, what did you give me?" I'm like, "I feel completely normal." So he tested positive. He tested subsequently negative within 4 days, and then he tested negative again, what would be like 7 days later. So pretty quick virologic clearance, and I think probably it's all has to do with the hydroxychloroquine. This drug, in my anecdotal experience, works. It's also supported by multiple studies with an emphasis on early treatment. Is it safe? The answer is absolutely it's safe. They actually went through and looked at the FDA's publicly available adverse events database of all of the hydroxychloroquine prescriptions, which was actually billions. In all of these, they only found 202 reported cases of cardiac-related deaths. Now, if you do the statistical analysis on that, you're more likely to hit the lottery on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday before you're having heart problems on hydroxychloroquine. If people do have pre-existing EKG abnormalities, yes. But that QTc prolongation they talk about is extremely rare. And if I see it in a patient, yes, I may have some hesitation, or I'd be careful with that patient. But that is a very rare issue. Again, in all my years, 20 years of prescribing this drug, I have never once had any sort of problem with it. And if you ask anyone, they're going to tell you this is a safe drug. And I'm going to tell you, I think Tylenol is a much more dangerous drug than hydroxychloroquine. So, given that there's clearly some evidence of efficacy here and it's safe, what does the American Medical Association have to say on this? Good question. April 17th, they actually put out a statement, so speaking out quite heavily against hydroxychloroquine, saying it was dangerous and not well studied. And here's the thing, they went an extra step, and this extra step was to the pharmacists, saying, don't fill these prescriptions. They should not be dispensed. Okay, so what they were saying is, hey, Dr. Ovalle, he has done his research, he knows what he's talking about. He thinks in his own cost-benefit analysis of his patients that hydroxychloroquine is worth trying. However, you can disregard his opinion. And that's what happened. Not only myself, but doctors throughout the country could not prescribe hydroxychloroquine. The pharmacists would refuse. And thanks to the American Medical Association backing the pharmacists, not the doctors, in this instance, really hampered our ability to use it. What does the AMA say on hydroxychloroquine today? And that's a good question. Here in November, shortly after actually the election, as it turns out, they came out with a statement, and this was it. The AMA rescind its statement calling for physicians to stop prescribing hydroxychloroquine because there's evidence of efficacy and safety. Resolved, moreover, we're going to take the necessary actions to require the local pharmacies to fill these prescriptions. Right? So, boy, that's an about face. Not only did they say, yeah, you should be prescribing it, but also telling the pharmacist, you can go ahead and fill it now. So, between April 2020 and November 2020, there were 220,000 deaths between these two recommendations in this about face of the American Medical Association. If you look at this study, you're welcome to pull it. It shows an efficacy rate of 91.7%. Good clinical outcomes when patients used hydroxychloroquine. That means this is the number of lives that could have been saved if the AMA came out strongly in favor of hydroxychloroquine at this time and not at this time. That's a real number. Those are real deaths, and that's a reality. Now, I can imagine the AMA will say, that's ridiculous, the studies weren't there. My issue with this is that this was a safe drug. They knew it was a safe drug, and it is my prerogative, like we use off-label prescribing all the time. It is my prerogative to make decisions for my patients based on my own knowledge and experience. And because they trumped that, it didn't give us an opportunity to practice good medicine. Now, after the fact, now they say, oh yeah, go ahead and prescribe it, now that 200,000 people have died. It is extremely disappointing. I am not a member of the AMA for this reason. I never will be again. And and I'm just sort of laying out my grievance. And unfortunately, I'm not quite done. There's more here. This, incidentally, is the one of the largest hydroxychloroquine production factories in the world. Yesterday, mysteriously blew up. I have no idea what's going on with this drug. Okay, so zinc and quercetin. I mentioned this in my very first talk. Take it every day. Studies now do support it. It will prevent you from getting COVID. I have had 2 cases now where there's a husband and wife. The husband who takes it doesn't get it. The wife who does not take it has COVID. And yet the husband never gets it from her, even though like he's taking care of her and so on. And I think it's going to be hard to get COVID if you're taking this daily. Ivermectin, also mentioned in my first talk. It's almost like you could just listen to my first talk again. At the time, I only had in vitro evidence, but now there's studies in humans confirming that ivermectin works beautifully. In fact, this was a meta-analysis done on ivermectin. It was presented to one of the Senate committee hearings, and I'm going to show you. Ivermectin prevents transmission and development of COVID study. Ivermectin hastens recovery and prevents deterioration study. Ivermectin hastens recovery and avoidance of ICU admissions. Ivermectin reduces mortality in critically ill patients with COVID, and on and on. It's impressive. Ivermectin is just kicking butt when it comes to COVID. Have you heard of people using ivermectin? Has the FDA approved ivermectin? Have you heard anything about this? No, besides my boring talks. No one is talking about ivermectin. This is a safe medication. It's been safe for a long time. We use it for scabies, and it happens to have antiviral activity against COVID-19. Why are we not using this is a completely confounding issue. I don't understand it. It's just completely irresponsible on the part of everybody, AMA, why, and the Drug Enforcement Agency. Why are we not using, why is this not being heralded as an excellent alternative to even vaccines? We can be using this for prophylaxis. So the question is, what does the FDA say on ivermectin? We clearly have data now. Well, back in May, I understand we didn't have the data yet, and their statement was, can't prescribe it. Well, now we have all the studies, so let's look. December 16th, when on an FAQ on their website, someone says, should COVID, and this is how they actually title this, COVID-19 and Ivermectin intended for animals. The question is, should I take Ivermectin? And they're talking about Ivermectin to be used in people and animals, and it's not approved for COVID-19. What kind of nonsense is this on the FDA website talking about Ivermectin intended for using in animals? I mean, who wrote this? It wasn't a doctor. It wasn't anyone with any sort of knowledge whatsoever on the subject. It is idiotic. It's embarrassing. The Food and Drug Administration is a joke. This drug absolutely should be approved, and we should be using it daily to save the tens of thousands of people that are dying because of this. So there you go. It boggles the mind. I should be put in charge, right? What can I say about this? At best, we say these people are just fools. At worst, we say there's a nefarious intent because the drug lobby may not want this drug that costs 20 cents a pill to be, competing with their very expensive vaccines. I mean, if you had to take ivermectin twice a week to prevent it successfully versus a vaccine, some people may do this. They'd rather do this. Who knows? But for whatever reason, no one is talking about ivermectin. The FDA hasn't approved it. We're not being encouraged to use it. It'd be off-label if I were to use it as of today. Okay, like last time, it's going to get dark on you. This is the way I roll, man. I get home from work, I do these things, and it gets dark quick. Vaccines. I'm going to talk a little bit about vaccines. I'm going to go into how they work. You may find this boring, and you may want to flip through. I happen to find it interesting. I hope you find it interesting. But I want to explain to you what the deal is, and so you really understand it, and you can impress your friends at the dinner table in 2 years when you can have dinner with them and really impress them with your knowledge. Okay, so this is the normal immune response. And basically you have a virus, it attacks you, and then once the virus is flying around in your bloodstream, it charges up your factory to produce antibodies. Now, these antibodies are nifty because they are exactly targeted at the proteins on this virus. So they attach to it. And then once the virus has all these antibodies attached to it, it makes it really clumsy and sticky, and it can't get inside cells. The spleen, the blood rushes through the spleen, and the spleen, it picks up this compound by the tail of the antibodies, and it actually snaps it out of the bloodstream, okay? And that's it. That's how it works. And that's great. That's our immunity. It's kept us alive as people for how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, I don't know. So why would we need a vaccine? Well, when you're lying down in the ICU with a pneumonia, you're waiting for this to happen, which unfortunately takes like 2 to 3 weeks to get good antibodies. And unfortunately, you may not have that luxury of that time. You may die before, these antibodies are made. So a vaccine allows, if you have these antibodies before you even got this virus in your system, that would be awesome. So you don't have to wait for the factory to wake up. Thus, vaccines. So, what are the different types of vaccines? How do they work? And I will not spend a lot of time on this, but this is where most vaccines, like all the ones you're familiar with, are made. They take the virus and they either do one of two things. They either attenuate it, which means they weaken it. It's still alive, but they weaken it, or they actually kill it, right? Either way, they're taking this semblance of this virus that no longer is going to make you sick. They inject it into you. Your factories are woken up, and it makes antibodies, right? Then, let's say a year later, when you're exposed to the actual virus, you already have antibodies that now recognize the real thing, right? And so you don't get sick, right? So you have these live attenuated or killed, right? And you can see those are the vaccines you're probably familiar with. Now, the third type of vaccine is the one we're interested in. It's called subunit vaccine. Now, imagine this is a COVID molecule, and it has these spike proteins on the surface. Question, what if I could make these spike proteins somehow, right? And then inject just the spike proteins into this person? Would that work? Would the factory develop antibodies to the spike, and then when the virus comes, it attaches? And the answer is yes, it does work. Now, we actually have vaccine, the hepatitis B and C vaccines, they actually work this way. Now, but the question really is, how do you make the spike? And in the case of hepatitis B and C, they use what's called DNA recombinant technology, and they actually culture like yeast cells to start making this protein. Sanofi tried to do this in respects to a vaccine for COVID, and by using recombinant DNA technology. It did not work. They did not get a robust antibody response. They had some other problems, so I don't think this is going to go anywhere. Now, let's get to the good stuff. Pfizer and Moderna, how do these work? I think I misspelled Moderna, I'm just realizing. I think it's MO, but anyways. This is really, really interesting what they figured out. Here you see are the spike proteins, but the question is, how do we get to them, right? So what they thought of, what if we use mRNA? This is the genetic material that codes for this protein to be made, okay? We inject this mRNA into a person, it finds its way into a cell, it finds a ribosome and gets translated into this protein. So by injecting this kind of, it's like a ticker tape, it goes through da, 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 and it starts, making these proteins inside the cell. Okay, and then you develop antibodies, and lo and behold, this absolutely worked. And the crazy thing about this is that these mRNA vaccines, this is a first. We've never had one. And in a period of 9 months, these researchers developed this, studied it, proved it, and now are actually manufacturing it within a 9-month period. 9 months, it's just, it's staggering to believe how ingenious and brilliant, Nobel Award winning kind of stuff this is. It's really, truly amazing. The thing I'm going to point out about this is that this mRNA structure doesn't ever go into, this is called the nucleus here. The nucleus is like, the sacred grounds of a cell. It's where we house our DNA. And we really don't like stuff going into the nucleus. We don't want to mess with our DNA. And what's nice about this mRNA is it doesn't. It stays in the cytoplasm, and it uses ribosomes to produce these proteins. Awesome. That's Pfizer and Moderna. Now, AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca went about it slightly different. They had what's called a DNA vaccine. So same kind of thing, but the DNA vaccine actually has to go inside your nucleus, where it gets transcribed into mRNA, and then that gets translated into proteins. As I mentioned, so that's fine and it works. I don't like the fact that it goes inside the nucleus. AstraZeneca made a statement basically saying that this vector, this DNA vector, does not interact with your genes that are located here, the chromosomal genes that are located inside the nucleus. I don't know how they can say that definitively, and I have some concerns about this, to be honest. Okay, so let's look at these results. These are the 3 studies, and we can see Moderna and Pfizer. They both had very similar results. And what they did was they did 2 injections at day 0 and 28 here, day 0 and 21 here. And this had 30,000, this had 43,000, and they both got excellent results in the 94% range here and in the 95% range here. Fantastic, unbelievable results. We're lucky to getting 70% on the flu vaccine. I mean, this is really, really impressive stuff. And it's a hallmark mechanism for vaccines. It's exciting. I mean, it's truly exciting stuff. Now, AstraZeneca, on the other hand, their study stunk, and I'm going to tell you why. They did, vaccine day 0 and 28, but what they did was they had 2 sites in Brazil and UK. Brazil 9,000, UK 3,000. But for some unbeknownst to me reason, I think it was a mistake, they give a full dose on day 1, a full dose on day 28 in Brazil, but in the UK they only gave a half dose, and then on the second one they gave a full dose. And what doesn't make sense is that they got a better efficacy, 90%, on the lower dose. That doesn't make sense. Anytime a study doesn't make sense with the results, it means something is awry. It just doesn't sit well with me, this entire thing. Now, if you look at their conclusion, they just put it all together and say 70%, which is not great. But I have major problems with this, and I'm very skeptical about this, for not just for this reason, but also for the fact that I mentioned about this requiring nucleus, penetration of their DNA vector. Okay, but why is this still going to be successful? Why are there still going to be hundreds of millions of these babies out? It's because of this. This requires storage for the Mrna in a freezer, in a household refrigerator freezer, right? This requires a hospital grade freezer that can get you down to negative 100 degrees. The Astrazeneca can be in the regular refrigerator. It just requires 46 Fahrenheit. So, and it's probably going to be made very cheaply, and there's going to be targeted, I'm going to guess, for maybe not first world nations, but there is a role for AstraZeneca, and they will be distributing lots of these, even though in my estimate, the efficacy is just not as good. Okay, the last thing I'm going to say about these 3 studies, these 2 being different than this one, these 2, when you came back, they did not do any PCR testing. They just asked you, how do you feel? AstraZeneca actually did a PCR test. And so here's the difference between the 2 in respects to data. These 2 figured out if the vaccines prevent a active disease, right? AstraZeneca found out if the vaccine prevents infection. Okay, so there's a difference there between disease and infection. In other words, if I take a Pfizer, for instance, vaccine, I know it's not going to cause symptoms because that's what they were studying. However, can I still get the virus? Can I still pass it on to someone else? We don't know because they didn't do any PCR testing. I will need to wear a mask still after getting a Pfizer or Moderna. I would not need to wear a mask after getting an AstraZeneca because this did study actual infection, whether I'm even carrying the disease, right? So that's an interesting distinction between the 2. Okay, I am recommending against AstraZeneca for all the reasons I just described. Now, I am recommending the Moderna and the Pfizer. It is absolutely safe. The data between groups was excellent. There were no serious adverse events. Well tolerated. I have no reservations about the safety of these vaccines. How long will the immunity last for? At least 6 months. I'm going to guess it's going to be a year, but it could be up to 2 years. It is 2 shots. It does protect you from disease. We don't know about infection. You do have to wear a mask after getting it. Can people who are immune suppressed get it? Yes. Can pregnant women get it? Yes. We don't know about children because that was not studied. It will not cost you any money. And we talk about a 4th wave. What does that mean? Well, the theory is everyone's going to get these Pfizer, Moderna vaccines, and then they're going to run around spreading the disease because it doesn't prevent infection. It's only preventing disease. I think that's a stretch. I really don't subscribe to that. Okay, here's the thing I'm going to mention about post-marketing. We're almost done, and my lights completely run out. And so this is going to become like one of the stylistic, components, elements of my videos, is the slow sundowning of my videos. But anyways, so post-marketing data is really important to keep track, of course, because you did 40,000, that's great. But what if there was a disease that this thing causes, but it was only 1 in 100,000? Your study wouldn't pick it up, right? So as millions of people are getting these vaccines, it is important to track them. But here's the thing I want you guys to know and think about. the study is done. There's no longer a control. You're not controlling things. So these observations of people having problems after getting vaccines, they're anecdotal, they're observational. They're not true studies, they're not a comparison. So we have to be extremely careful when you hear these things about people. Someone gets lymphoma, you're going to hear about a patient got lymphoma after getting a vaccine, and we don't know if that person would have gotten lymphoma anyways, right? So it's going to be extremely difficult. And you're going to hear probably a lot of people blaming everything but the kitchen sink on a COVID-19 vaccine. You know, we're just going to have to take some of these things with a grain of salt and look for overall trending patterns, but it will provide some serious difficulty. You know, just the other day, we saw, you probably saw maybe this nurse passed out after and she had what's called a vasovagal episode after the vaccine. I knew the minute I saw it on TV. It was a benign, you know, result. Some people pass out when they get shots. Well, you know, if I didn't know any better, I'd say, I'm not getting that vaccine. That lady almost died right in front of me, you know, and that's the problem. So we have to be very careful when we start hearing these stories. Okay, distribution. So basically the distribution, 1A is going to be all the healthcare workers. I'm getting mine, I think, next week from the hospital. So that doesn't concern most of you guys. When they had a meeting on Sunday about basically what it qualifies for the 1B, and they included anyone over 75. So if you're over 75, starting in January, you're probably going to be able to get the vaccine. Also, people who work in what they call key societal functioning areas like teachers, police, firefighters, prison officers, grocery store workers will also be able to get it starting at that time period. Now, most of you are what we call 1C, and this is going to start here in February, where if you're 65 and older, but you also have some underlying medical conditions, you're going to be able to receive this as well as what they call non-frontline workers, but in construction, waste, trucking, food services. Now, the rest of everybody is called phase 2, and that's going to be, oh my God, I can't even see myself. That's going to be in summertime, May or something like that. April, May. Okay, so here's the big question on all this. Is the vaccine going to save the day? And I'm going to tell you the answer. It's a mixed bag, right? Because the vaccine, as we get it, in the 1A, B, and C, it will help mortality rate improve because the sickest of our population will be protected. It is not going to help, in my estimate, the incident rate. Why? Because here's where people are spreading the disease. You know, the 1B people are not hitting the clubs at night and gathering, to have cocktails with their friends or whatever. No, they're pretty much hunkered down at home. This is the people that are actually spreading the disease, and they're not going to be getting this till April, May, June, right? So I think the cases are still going to be this undulating up and down with peaks and valleys up until probably September, October, at which point this group will be vaccinated. So that is my talk. And here we are in the dark of night. So I hope that was helpful. I was speaking fast. That was 43 minutes. Oh, there you go. I wanted to get it, within about 45 minutes. Please feel free to give me a call if you have any questions about any of this. Certainly if you're having any symptoms or if you're not feeling well and you think you may have COVID, I would like to know, of course. I want to tell you on behalf of Tyce, Medea, and myself that we're very thankful to all of you for allowing us to take good care of you guys. We appreciate all of you, and we want to wish you guys an amazing, and safe Christmas and New Year. I know 2021 is going to have its challenges like 2020 did, but hopefully things are going to get better here soon, especially if we start using some of these medications we have available to us, getting the vaccines, and continuing to be careful with masks and social isolation. So take care, be good, and we'll be talking soon. Bye-bye, guys.